Good morning, kids. Today we're checking out a brand new video from Pop Girl Studios of turning horror game characters into Marvel heroes. Now, yes, he has done this before with famous horror characters from movies, but now we're doing the horror game genre. Let's hop in.
I get a lot of requests from my subscribers to work with different horror video games. So today, as a sort of spin-off from my recent Five Nights at Freddy's Animatronics as Marvel Villains episode, and my series of taking famous horror movie characters and turning them into Marvel superheroes, I'm going to take a bunch of characters out of different horror video games that have been requested that I work with, rewrite their backstories, and redesign them to fit them in as superheroes in the Marvel Universe. Let's see how this goes, shall we? Let's go!
Hit like if you want, subscribe if you feel like.
Give it up, my name, brother.
Enjoy the show.
Well, this is little known to most people.
Of course. We're starting out with the biggest of the ladies, Lady Dimitrescu from Resident Evil Village. Oh my god, my brain just crapped on me for 5 seconds. I'm so sorry.
Eric Brooks, more commonly called Blade, has a daughter named Brielle. She was not a part of his life, and he had not intended to make her a part of it.
Good pose.
Until he no longer felt he had a choice. He was contacted by the girl's mother in a panic and told that Brielle had been kidnapped, and Blade quickly dropped everything to go hunt down those responsible. But
damn it.
His search would not bring him up against your average ransom-seeking thugs. Instead, it would bring him closer to a foe he'd faced before.
Uh-oh.
You see, his estranged daughter had been taken to a castle in an old abandoned town in Romania. Well, perhaps abandoned is not exactly accurate, as there were dozens of mutated, demonic beings running around eager to attack Blade when he arrived.
So yeah, you could say abandoned with quotes.
He made quick work of them, though, as he fought his way to the castle,
Nice.
but the threats inside were far more formidable. He was first attacked by 3 young-looking vampiric women, but he was only able to be fully restrained by them when an older, much taller woman came onto the scene.
Oh yes.
She seemed to be a vampire herself, but not just that. Something more. She could shapeshift and grow her nails into long claws, and with additional speed and strength, she was able to overpower Blade. But when she got him restrained, unknown to the other vampires, she whispered in his ear, "Your daughter is in the crypts beneath the castle, but she will only be safe when Lilith is defeated."
Oh.
The name was one that Blade knew all too well, as he and his allies in the Midnight Suns had faced off against the Mother of Demons many times before. This large vampiric woman subtly helped Blade escape while pretending to still be against him so that he could head down to the crypts and also call his allies, alerting them that Lilith had once again returned. All the while, the woman who'd helped him, Alcina Dimitrescu, kept up the facade of working for Lilith, the very being who'd turned her into what she is today. Alcina had once been a wealthy aristocrat
like
of
Mother
this town,
Miranda.
but one with a rare and believed to be incurable blood disease that was likely to end her life within a few years. She was desperate to find any way to rid herself of it, and it seemed that Lilith had sensed this desperation. As Lilith was regaining power from her last struggle with the Midnight Suns, she invaded Alcina's mind. She promised Alcina that she could cure the woman of her blood disorder, along with making her far more powerful than anyone she'd ever encountered, if Alcina agreed to be Lilith's right hand in her pending invasion, attempting to storm and conquer the earth once more with a new, improved demonic Lilin army. Initially, Alcina was fine with this, caring little for others and simply wanting to live. But she'd come to regret this decision as she saw what came of her village soon after. Alcina was given a myriad of abilities, and her blood disease was not eradicated, but was able to be suppressed by Alcina consuming the blood of others. For years, she watched as Lilith took more and more people from her village and warped and experimented on them, most against their will, to try and make a perfect version of her demons, to no avail. Alcina had never cared much for the people of her village, or for anyone else at all, but seeing them tortured and torn from their families on...
Hey, for those of you that haven't played the game, Lycan is pretty much like the Latin word for werewolf or something. But in the game, whenever you're just wandering about the village, you have to fight creatures that are called Lycans, but they're pretty much just werewolf humans. Other than that, you got a couple giants, but that's it. Then you got the 4 bosses, and then they got their own kind of custom areas. honestly, it is a damn good game. If you don't want to play it, I'd recommend at least watching it. It's very good.
Mass was not something she could watch for long. Luckily, she eventually got an idea from overhearing Lilith on multiple occasions cursing the group known as the Midnight Suns and its many heroic members who'd bested her before. Alcina then secretly did more research into the Suns and learned of Blade, a Dampier possessing some human and some vampire traits. Alcina then tricked Lilith into thinking that he was the exact kind of person she needed to create the demon she was trying to make, thinking Lilith would then be forced to bring Blade to the castle, at which point Alcina could turn on Lilith and help Blade defeat her. But Alcina hadn't known about Blade's secret daughter, and Lilith had. Demons were sent to kidnap Brielle Brooks, who is a high school-age student at this point and a Dampier herself. Alcina felt bad for getting the young girl wrapped up in this, but it had still resulted in Blade's arrival, so her plan was still underway. After Blade had arrived, then she'd helped him escape. It didn't take long for him to call Doctor Strange, and the Sorcerer Supreme, upon hearing of Lilith's return, quickly rounded up Ghost Rider, Morbius, Elsa Bloodstone, and a few others to transport to Blade's location.
Oh, hell yeah, that's a lot of good
They freed
people.
Brielle from the crypts and were quickly faced with their old foe Lilith, who of course was not expecting her right hand to stab her in the back. Alcina pierced her clawed fingers straight through Lilith's body from behind, and while it was a strong blow, it did not kill the Mother of Demons. Alcina then fought alongside the Midnight Suns to slay many of Lilith's creations and tried to bring her down, but she was eventually able to escape. Alcina swore not to stop hunting her until Lilith was defeated, and this of course put her in direct alignment with the Midnight Suns' goal. Her vast knowledge of Lilith's latest schemes were invaluable to the Suns, and her abilities were formidable, making it an easy choice to embrace her as a part of the group, turning Alcina Dimitrescu from the demonic right hand of Lilith to the world's newest demon-hunting hero.
You know, I gotta ask though, did Z create that costume herself? Because damn is it tight on her calves. Like, if it wasn't for her being so damn tall, I would think she had a hard time moving in that.
Mojo World is a place that no human...
Oh, hell yes, we're getting 6 up in this!
...would ever desire to visit. It is an extra-dimensional and extra-temporal place inhabited by a race called the Spineless Ones. Mutated yellow humanoids, many of whom have had their minds warped and twisted by constant waves of energy and radiation drawn in from other dimensions through a signal tower, utilized by the ruler of this world, Mojo. The tower is meant to pull in brainwashing entertainment from many other dimensions, and so long as it does that, Mojo doesn't care how much it can warp the minds of his subjects. His main goal is to provide more and more mindless and often heartless entertainment to the residents of the Mojoverse to keep them docile and complacent. One of his most common ways of sating their twisted lust for violent entertainment is by kidnapping mutants and superhumans from Earth and forcing them to fight to the death. Because this is a frequent source of entertainment, proven to be popular amongst his people, Mojo eventually took to kidnapping those with mutant genes just as their mutant abilities were manifesting, keeping them in various prisons and facilities while their powers developed, to soon after put them in the arenas. This is what happened.
Okay, that is an evil idea, but that is also kind of a good idea, because it lets them, you know, train their powers and figure out what they can and can't do with it. And okay, it's pretty much like Charles Xavier's School for the Gifted, but without being the up school, you know.
Happened to a quiet and reserved girl who simply went by the number she was given in the facility she was held in. 6. While some of the other kids she was imprisoned with tried to bond with one another and vent their shared fears together, 6 isolated herself, never sharing her name or even speaking, often just soothing herself in this horrible place with a pocket-sized music box she had when she was taken. Well, she wouldn't admit it, 6 scared herself. Any time she looked at a mutant using their abilities, images would flash through her mind of her killing them, even though she had no hatred towards mutants or anyone other than Mojo and his minions. These strange impulses just pushed her more into staying silent and secretly spending her time scheming, planning for a way to escape and kill whatever monstrous Mojo World resident got in her way. But her first attempt did not go as she hoped. 6 was initially kept in a place called the Nest, a prison that sat on top of a large cliff over a lake next to the capital city of Mojo World. Her first goal was to escape the nest, cross the lake, and reach the city. She didn't know where to go from there, but at least it was a start. Unfortunately, without her mutant abilities having manifested yet, as far as she knew that is, this would not be easy, and while she did manage to get out of the facility and down to the water, she'd soon after be caught by a minion of Mojo's who simply went by the name The Hunter. He took her to his isolated home on the opposite side of the lake.
He is just straight up giving us the lore and details of all the games in order. From Littlest Nightmares to Little Nightmares 2 to even Little Nightmares 1. Dude, you are just golf clap.
To keep her locked up while he'd report to Mojo what had happened, hoping to get a reward for her return. But what the Hunter didn't know was that another escaped mutant had seen him taking her to this place and would help her escape. He broke into the room she was held in and introduced himself as Mono, a superhero name he'd given himself because of his ability to teleport short ranges, but only through devices that channeled radio or television waves. Six was reluctant to accept his help, still not confessing her confusing urges to hurt other mutants, but eventually did agree to go with him, seeing it as her only option now for escape. They fled the Hunter, took his boat, and sailed it across the lake. Mono claimed that the signal tower at the center of the city had a master portal in it that let Mojo send his minions to Earth to kidnap mutants. If they could get to it, then they could escape and go call the X-Men or Avengers or Fantastic Four or whoever to come back and rescue all the other mutants.
Them all.
Six thought that Mono was being overly optimistic, but didn't say anything still. On their trip, another ship would come up next to them, headed by a woman named Lady Domo. She was also a mutant from Earth with telekinesis, but had been corrupted by her time in Mojo World to eventually agree to work for the Madman.
Nice suit.
She ran another prison called the Maw, and had heard of the escapees and planned to take them for herself. But this wouldn't prove to be as easy as she thought. You see, surprising even herself, Six was immune to this woman's telekinesis, and since this woman was a mutant who worked for Mojo, Six didn't feel the need to hold back her bloodlust this time. Six embraced her savage impulses, lunged at the woman, and bit into her neck. She clawed at her eyes, squeezed her arms around the woman's throat, whatever she had to do, until the woman fell to the deck, dead. Mono was frightened by what he'd just seen, but also still grateful, and after ensuring that Six was all right, he steered Lady Domo's ship towards the city. Not knowing that something...
Hold on. It's like, well, that was terrifying. On to the show.
New was bubbling up inside of Six. She quickly realized why her lust to harm other mutants existed within her. By killing Lady Domo, Six had acquired the woman's telekinetic abilities.
There it is.
Unfortunately, she was not yet adept with using these powers, so it would still be a struggle for her and Mono to sneak and fight their way through the city to get to the signal tower. But they were eventually able to make it. Their trek through the tower was even more treacherous still, as the amplified radiation wreaked havoc on Six's body. When they were only a few floors away from their goal, she was transformed by the signal into a gangly, monstrous version of herself, and her lust to kill mutants became uncontrollable, leading to her attacking the very ally that was helping her escape. She watched in horror, unable to control herself, as she nearly killed Mono. But he was a nimble young man and managed to evade most of her attacks to snatch off Six her music box and play it, soothing her and slowly turning her back to normal. She took it back from him and kept playing it to keep herself sane for the rest of their time in the tower. But by this point, everyone in the tower knew that there were escaped mutants inside trying to flee.
I'm
just
pretty sure it was
barely made
damn
it to
loud.
the room with the portals when Mojo caught up to them.
Not the music box, just the constant fighting,
and got his grubby claws around Mono. Six tried to use her powers on him, but like she had been, Mojo was immune to them, and soon he was inches away from grabbing Six as well. So she made a very difficult call. Six leapt through the portal back to Earth without Mono, but swore to do the very thing that he'd planned to do. She went straight to the X-Men, told them what was happening, and suited up to go back with them to save Mono and every other mutant that Mojo had trapped in his vile dimension.
I guess no Thin Man, but that's perfectly fine. Anyway, this one was pretty good. Not the best, but pretty good.
I'm a big fan of behind-the-scenes stuff, learning how different artists make the things that they make. And if you're like that as well, you might want to consider joining the Popcraft Studios Patreon, where I'm currently doing weekly podcasts, and most of the episodes are part of my Design Notes Popcast series, where I talk about how I came up with the stories and designs for episodes like this. There's one up there already for the FNAF Marvel episode, and a podcast episode around this video will be going up on Wednesday. Also, Patreon members get access to high-resolution art and inks from all my videos a day before a video's released. That'll be linked in the description, as well as links to posters from all the art from this episode if anybody wants those. They're up on my Teespring store. But anyway, sorry for the interruption. Back into more art and stories. Let's
Alright, who's
Zachary
next?
Bunzapin didn't think much about his life.
Wait. Bunzo Bunny? That's the one you decided? You know what? I guess I have no room to talk. Alright, go ahead.
Before working for Hydra. And while he simply believed this to be a result of his life being uneventful prior to his career, in actuality it was because if he tried to think about it, he'd find he had very few memories to pull from. For the last 5 years, he'd worked as a chipper and pleasant resident superhero and sort of mascot for the kids in his Hydra base's Orphan Initiative game station. You see, like most people who worked for Hydra across the world, Zachary had been convinced that they were exclusively doing good things for the world, and direct evidence of that to him was that Hydra had created a financial incentive for employees to adopt orphans in need, and had a facility in their worksite for the kids to play in and be taken care of while their parents were working. The entrance to the site even had a pleasant and welcoming message recorded by the site's noble leader, Madam Hydra, which would greet all entrants by saying, "Hi kids, welcome to the game station. I'm Viper and we've got some super duper games for you to play." Zachary had worked in this station for years, helping to test children that showed promise in early intelligence or even potential for superhuman abilities. There were many types of tests, but he ran one to help them develop memory and pattern recognition skills, and encourage them all that if they became smart and strong enough, maybe they could be a superhero just like him someday. Though he knew it was a bit of a lie, as he'd never actually gone out into the field to do real superhero work for Hydra. Perhaps if he had, he would have discovered sooner that his employers were not...
Hey, you know what? I wonder if this guy worked with Bob. That's kind of an Easter egg for all of you out there. You can look him up, or just not.
...as good for the world as they claimed. When a child showed enough promise in all of the tests the facility had to offer, they'd then be taken away on an underground train car, and Bunzapin would often cheer this on as a wonderful thing, having been told that it meant they were being taken to a special class to be trained further. But eventually he started asking questions of his higher-ups as to when he could see some of these kids again, eager to find out how they were developing, and often hoping to celebrate their birthdays with them. His queries were always ignored or brushed away with half-hearted answers, and eventually he couldn't handle not knowing. At the end of a workday, instead of heading back to his chambers on site, he snuck into the train tunnel and followed it down and down and down, until he came to a site he hadn't even known existed. It didn't look like a classroom, but more like a laboratory, and after being there for a few moments, he found it was not one he should have been proud to be sending children to. The only kids he found there were strapped down to tables and being experimented on. Hydra was trying to make different breeds of super soldiers, using various means of body augmentation, magic, science, whatever they thought could work. They were testing these things out on the most intelligent and promising children in an effort to turn them into future weapons for Hydra's conquests. Bunzapin, with this information, went straight to Madam Hydra, certain that someone as kind and caring towards the children as her couldn't have known what they were doing. But she did. In fact, it was all her idea to bring orphans in to be experimented on, and worse still, Bunzapin had been one of her experiments. His memories of his past life had been erased, and he'd been given his powers by the very lab he'd just seen. But now, if he didn't fall back in line, Viper would have to terminate his employment with Hydra. He refused to watch more kids be tortured and tested, and so, Viper tried to kill him. She very nearly succeeded as well, but he used his superhuman agility to get away and into the air vents to eventually climb and crawl to freedom, finding himself on a mountain in Sokovia. In his first weeks out, he stayed in hiding, but started learning about how the rest of the world saw Hydra and all the horrible things the organization had done. He'd been told that if he ever ventured out, the outside world would try to turn him against his brethren, but now he didn't know what to think. Had everything in his life truly been a lie?
Pretty much.
He wasn't certain about almost anything, but what he did know for sure was that he needed to free those children and shut down Madame Hydra's experiments. Even if it meant seeking out the so-called heroes of Earth that he'd long been told were his sworn enemies, he'd do whatever he had to make those kids safe.
You gotta do what you gotta do when it comes to protecting kids. Well, not to an extreme, but you get what I mean.
There are hundreds, if not thousands.
Oh, well, look at that. Huh, we're going with the basic enemy of My Friendly Neighborhood. Not one of the bosses, I see. But, you know what? I think it will be okay.
Life-bearing worlds with various breeds and alignments of aliens, from the shape-shifting Skrulls to the symbiotic Clintar to the vicious Brood. But a lesser-known race was one that was possibly the kindest and most benevolent in the galaxy, the Pupplies. They were a very peaceful people who may have seemed simple upon speaking to them, but were incredibly emotionally mature and kind and understanding. A group of them had found their way to Earth a few years back, and were quickly found and embraced by an executive at the Roxxon Corporation, which was branching out and creating a media arm to their company. Dario Agger, Roxxon's acting CEO at the time, had a fair deal of underhanded schemes in the works,
Look at
and
that
wanted
hair.
something to help distract people from what Roxxon was doing, while also giving the company a better public face, and the Pupplies seemed like a great way to make that happen. You see, along with being
yeah,
very
kind of.
kind and considerate, the Pupplies had a very child-friendly, warm appearance. Plus, they spoke in fairly simple language, easy for children to understand. Agger put an executive, Ronald Rickbacher, in charge of getting a TV show off the
Rickbacher.
ground, and soon, the children's program,
Rick.
My
I
Friendly
get it.
Neighborhood, was made. It was a great success, with the Pupplies essentially writing the show for the writers, by simply expressing their true feelings about common situations. Despite the simplicity of their words, they were surprisingly wise. But the more time they'd spend around Roxxon executives, the more this wisdom seemed to fade. Norman, whose real name was Naormu Oman, but had been told to change it because his name sounded too foreign for an American audience, had started to see his friends becoming slowly corrupted. When the show's ratings started taking a dip a few years in, as some Roxxon scandals were exposed to the world, they started forcing in corporate sponsorships that Norman was uncomfortable with. But the executives of the company, and Agger himself, would constantly encourage the Pupplies to always be looking for more ways to bring in bigger bucks with the show. Norman saw his friends starting to become greedy, and even acting rudely towards lower-level staff at Roxxon, as they saw the executives often doing. Off-screen, they were shifting farther and farther away from the morals they so enthusiastically tried to teach kids who watched their program. Norman couldn't stand it. He found more and more that he was feeling all alone when he was in the presence of the friends he loved so dearly. Eventually, he decided to approach Dario Agger himself and talk about the culture his company was encouraging to try and make some changes for the betterment of everyone. When he overheard Agger talking to a group that he referred to as the Dark Council. He was talking about how he was not only papering over his company's cruel exploits with things like Norman's show, but how he and this council were gaining enough power in their own respective realms of the universe to gain control over Earth, Asgard, and beyond. Norman, the inherent optimist that he was, went into the room after the meeting concluded and told Agger what he'd heard, but tried to convince the man to change his ways, that with all his company's influence, they genuinely could do great things for the world, and how doing so was the best thing Agger could do for himself, because of how good it feels to do good for others. But in this case, Norman's optimism was misplaced. Agger, to Norman's shock, transformed into a minotaur and beat the alien to near death in an effort to keep him quiet about the Dark Council. Agger thought he genuinely had killed Norman, not realizing that despite this alien race's plucky, kind attitude, they were surprisingly durable and strong. After surviving the incident, in secret, Norman tried to go to his friends and tell them what had happened, that they had to escape and stop working for Roxxon.
We gotta get out of here!
None of them believed him, and had been told by Agger that Norman had been let go because he'd tried to go over his friends' heads and make a spin-off show without them with another company. Norman was heartbroken that his friends no longer trusted him and how they were becoming crueler and greedier, and he feared what Agar would do to the demeanor of the whole world if he was genuinely able to gain power over it. And so Norman left and went straight to Earth's mightiest heroes to tell them what he knew about Agar's plans and how Roxxon had to be stopped. Norman needed to get his friends in better company so they could remember the morals that had once helped them create a show that had such a positive influence on the attitudes of children. While Norman wasn't much of a fighter, he'd don a suit and costume as well, knowing that superheroes had a bigger voice than near anyone else on Earth at the time. And if he wanted his message of kindness and compassion to be heard, while aiding...
Oh, and instead of being my friendly neighbor, it could actually be... Hey, my friendly Norman or something. I don't know.
The Avengers and taking down Roxxon, this may be the new best way to do it.
Well, alright. This was pretty damn good. And honestly, gave me a chuckle every now and then.
If you enjoyed this, I highly recommend checking out my recent Five Nights at Freddy's Animatronics as Marvel Villains episode, or maybe my slightly older famous video game Villains as Superheroes episode. I'd also love more suggestions for other horror games I could work with, or I guess video games in general. Or if there's any of these games that you'd like me to do a full video based around. Leave me your ideas in the comments. But besides that, that's all for today, except of course for ending this video on some kind of positive or inspiring note. And the thought I want to leave people with is the idea that you will never figure out all of the things you need to learn to be successful at something until you actually start going after that thing. The lessons will come up as you're going through the process of doing it. So stop trying to figure out everything you think you need to know in advance to do a thing, and just start doing the thing. That's what I did with Popcross Studios, and I'd say it's worked out pretty well for me. I hope that's inspiring. I love you all, and I'll see you all in the next episode on Monday. We're finally going back to a dragon episode. I'll see you there. Sweet. Goodbye.
Well, folks, that's going to be the end of today's video. I hope you all enjoyed this. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe for more. Link to the original will be in the description below. And I'll see all you folks next time when we flick on. Peace out.